A critical moment in the battle over those thousands of documents seized from Mar-a-Lago, and one that proves just how bad this could be for the ex-president. His fight to keep them away from the Justice Department has now reached every level of our judicial system. First at the district court level, where he was successful in getting Judge Eileen Cannon to approve another district judge, Raymond Dearie, as special master. Then an appeals court rejected that move. Two of those three judges were Trump appointees, by the way. So now Trump is dragging the U.S. Supreme Court into the fray in these efforts to overrule them. It is that latest escalation by the ex-president's legal team asking Justice Clarence Thomas, no less, to restore the special master's authority over about 100 classified documents and once again halt DOJ's access to them. DOJ has until Tuesday to challenge it. Just yesterday, more bad news for Trump's whole delay strategy. The appeals court has agreed, quote, with no extensions allowed, to fast track its consideration of DOJ's request to shut down the special master's review of all 11,000 documents entirely. We're back with Mary, Mike, and John. Mary, what does this mean, practically speaking? And how much of this will we see? How much of this is public-facing, including filings or other moves?
Well, the filings so far, of course, in the Supreme Court are public, and I think it's a very interesting strategy here to go, although not surprising. Trump likes to go to the Supreme Court. He's really trying to take advantage of the shadow docket, which is, of course, the docket where emergency motions are filed. It's not the normal petition for the court to accept a case on certiorari and have full briefing over the course of months and argument. It's like an emergency motion, which oftentimes results in a very short order without a lot of reasoning behind it by the Supreme Court. And, so he's got that going on. But what's really interesting is the timing on that is really going to coincide exactly with the new timing on the expedited appeal in the 11th Circuit. So what Trump's trying to do is get the Supreme Court to actually vacate or, erase, nullify the stay that the 11th Circuit issued against Judge Cannon's order. And that meant that Judge Cannon's order was not valid with respect to the classified documents, that the government was able to go ahead and use them in its criminal investigation and did not have to provide those to the special master. The government, though, remember, had actually appealed the entire ruling of Judge Cannon on the special master. It only sought a stay of the classified. So that's what the 11th Circuit has now expedited appeal of the merits of that entire ruling at the same time that Trump is up in the Supreme Court trying to quash what the 11th Circuit has done already. So there's a lot going on here. There's a lot to unpack, but the timing could be such that the 11th Circuit rules on the merits of the special master, the entire appointment of the special master before and the delay of other things before the special master even finishes his work.
Director Brennan, is it your sense that the national security imperative of getting into the classified documents is paralyzed while all of this goes on?
Yes, Nicole. I certainly want them to pursue the investigation from an accountability standpoint to see the criminal investigation. But as a former national security official, I am most concerned about the inability of the government, both the FBI and the intelligence community, to do the investigation, to find out what was the actual provenance of those documents when they left the White House down to Mar-a-Lago, moved around, and to review them so that they can make the appropriate decisions as far as what actions they might have to take in order to protect either very sensitive technical collection systems or human sources or other types of programs. And while Trump's lawyers and Trump continue to put this into the court system, this delay and delay and delay is just preventing that investigative effort from moving forward, which I hope is going to give us some sense about whether or not there was compromise here, because there are very large national security stakes involved.
How unusual is it for the government, the federal government, to be unable to do an assessment of damage? How rare is that? Is that something you'd ever heard of before?
Well, I've never heard of a president or anybody claiming that they owned the classified documents. That is just absurd on its face. And so what the intelligence community really needs is access to those documents in order to do the risk assessment as far as how likely was it that they were compromised, and if they were compromised, what actions need to be taken. So this is very unprecedented on so many different levels, because the intelligence community, the FBI, really, once they have documents, I've never heard of a case before, they've been prevented that the government has been prevented from looking at their own documents, classified documents, irrespective of what Trump claims that he might have declassified. These are government documents that deal with very sensitive national security programs. And so therefore, it's really outrageous that Trump and his team are doing this because it delays that review that is so necessary.
I mean, Mary, we get down into the weeds on this story, and I'm often reminded that what we're talking about is an inside threat. An ex-American commander-in-chief preventing an assessment of U.S. national security. How do we sort of future-proof the presidency from someone like Donald Trump?
Well, I think, that will be the subject of probably a lot of legislative hearings and a lot of, legal analysis once we get through this. Are there other things to be done legislatively to tighten things up with respect to this? I will say, though, that, this, as John Brennan said, nothing like this has ever happened before. And it's really pretty incredible and mind-boggling that this would be happening at this point in time. A president essentially claiming that classified records could be personal records and that the government shouldn't be able to use them in its investigation. Now, right now, we keep talking about Trump thwarting it, but right now, the 11th Circuit's stay is in effect, which means the classified information right now, the classified documents, can be used by the government in its ongoing criminal and national security assessment. If the Supreme Court reverses that, then we'll be back in a situation where the government can't move forward. The government right now, though, can't use any of the other 11,000 unclassified documents in that investigation. But those are in a different category. But that's still a big delay, and I think that's why we're seeing an expedition of the appeal. And if I could just add one other thing that I think is really remarkable here. It's the moving goalposts that Trump's team is doing. You'll recall when they first went to Judge Cannon, they talked about privilege, right? Executive privilege, attorney-client privilege, and that's why the special master needed to review all of these documents. As that has evolved, and as we've had the special master do what it's done and the 11th Circuit do what it's done, they've now changed that, where they're actually saying to the Supreme Court that the special master, and I'm looking over at another screen reading it, needs to determine whether documents bearing classification markings are in fact classified. Now, that is a completely different thing from what they originally said they needed a special master for. That's nothing that a special master has any ability to assess. That's the national security community, the intelligence community that classifies documents. And remember as well, when the special master, Judge Dearie, asked Trump's team to tell them if they had if they were asserting that Trump had declassified any documents, they declined to do so. So this is real gamesmanship that the Trump lawyers are playing with the courts now.
What do we make of the fact, Director Brennan, that there's classified material unaccounted for? I mean, do we even know, to Mary's point, that all of it has been retrieved?
Well, I think it's become clear that the security practices in the White House really were quite lax during the Trump administration. And so the accounting, the record keeping, and other types of things. And so I think the government doesn't know, quite frankly, what documents might still be missing, because the usual records that they might have kept would have given them insight into that. But given that that didn't happen under the Trump White House, I think they're just hoping that they have the bulk of them, all of them or whatever. But who knows what might else be out there, which I think is really quite unnerving to a national security professional.